How many breatharians are there in this country, would you say?
I don't know of that many. I know of several people that have, for instance, there was a young lady who stopped eating when she was 9 years old, and she didn't eat anything for 10 years. And there are other people that are at varying degrees of breatharianism, you see. So there's another thing that's...
I got to ask you this one on the air.
Okay.
You're asked it all the time.
Right.
We read that the hunger strikers in Belfast died.
Right.
You're living. What's
That's
the
right.
difference? What's the difference?
The difference is, very importantly, they wanted to die.
Welcome to Influence to Death, your guide for navigating the wild world of wellness influencing. Welcome to Influence to Death. I am Victoria LaFont, one of your co-hosts.
I'm Hannah Wright, your other co-host.
And this is our first episode. We're really happy that you're here. So in this first episode, we are going to go over the vibe of the podcast. We're going to give you a little bit of background information about how each episode will go. And then we are going to go right into our first topic, which is breatharianism. This turned into the most spread out, surprising, I feel like shame almost or something, like asking the most unorthodox questions that you can ask as somebody who is really interested in metabolism. I think I have a little fear around this podcast that comes up, but to me, it's a really cool topic to start with because there were actually fatalities from breatharianism, like people were literally influenced to death. So it's fitting to start the podcast off with this topic. And then it's just a very historical trend, like
it goes back far,
cool.
But we'll focus on in, our modern culture, like how the influencers, the major influencers behind it, but they weren't, they didn't invent it. It's been around.
Been around for a long time. Yeah. And I think it's also an interesting topic because it's so challenging of what we know currently about metabolism. So, okay, but anyway, the vibe of the podcast. Do you just want to say a few words about, like, what does this podcast mean to you, Hannah?
Well, since you asked, when we had the idea to do this, I was so excited because I am very anti-influencer. I mean, I obviously use Instagram a lot for my business. But I was really resistant to doing that because I get frustrated seeing like the snake oil salesman, somebody pushing this product, and people believing it's going to heal them. And, maybe sometimes it does, but with nutrition science, it's really nuanced. And as we know, one thing that works for some person might not work for the other person. And I don't like seeing it made into this like holy grail, like heal all, this will heal you. You have to do it my way. This is the only way. That makes me really mad. And I get super frustrated with it. On the other hand, I know people love that. Yeah. They like having that one solution because it's easy. It's like a simple solution. You don't have to think about it. You just do it. So this is a very long answer.
It's great. Keep going.
I'm just excited for us to have all of these episodes about these weird like things in the wellness world that I get asked often about. I'm sure you do too, from my clients or students or friends or whoever. Like, should I do this? Does this work? Is this it? Like, do you agree with this? And if I'm sure you're the same way, usually I'm like, well, mate, it depends.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. And like, I think people get frustrated with me because I won't give them a clear answer, but I can't give a clear answer for the most part.
You have a lot of integrity that exists, I think, around the information that you give out, which is one of the main reasons I'm so excited to co-host this podcast with you, is because I've seen that integrity for so many years as we've worked together.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I see the same in you, and that's why we're here. Like,
yeah,
I feel like we have the ability to kind of bring this conversation to the table and be like, let's talk about these weird things. Maybe they work. Maybe they're a really bad idea. Or
Mhm.
maybe they work for you, but not for your friend, And so,
Yeah. I mean, yesterday, Hannah, I was actually on the phone. I rarely talk to active clients anymore, but I was a clinician for years, for almost a decade. I know that you've worked as a clinician for a long time. So we're bringing that perspective, then along with like a lot of scientific literacy, just to let people know you and I both have graduate degrees in nutrition and functional medicine. I actually work part-time for a university doing course facilitator work. So we're around research a lot. Hopefully no one is like, oh my God, this kook is now on a podcast. But I still do have clients from the past that contact me every once in a while, and I loved my clients. So when they call or contact me, I'm like, of course, I'll talk to you. Yeah. So I was on the phone with this woman yesterday, and she's like, oh, I think you can help shed some light, on this issue that my girlfriend is having. And I was like, I don't know, actually. I was like, the more I learn, the less I feel able to give you an answer that like maybe would even be practical. Like I can tell you what I know about the immune system, and I can tell you what tests you more than likely need to have run. But there is this feeling of like, the deeper I get into this, I'm like, okay, yeah, some things are clarified, but more than anything, I have questions about so many more topics now than I ever did. And it's not exact, but it's adjacent to the Dunning-Kruger effect, which we can link an article in the show notes about that. But essentially, there were these two researchers, Dunning and Kruger, who investigated people's perceptions and beliefs around their confidence with what they know or what they don't know. And the outcomes were really interesting. Like people who actually didn't have a great grasp of knowledge on a topic felt like they knew a lot.
a lot. Like they are the expert.
Yeah. And I think they call it Mount Stupid. Like you're on top of Mount Stupid, which actually I'm like, I feel like I'm just coming down. I'm like still like in the foothills of Mount Stupid, like coming down from it. Maybe I'm now in like the pit of despair before you become like a true professional. But the problem was then that people who were actually, subject matter experts, they kind of assumed that everybody else had the knowledge base that they had, which creates this really like difficult paradigm. And I feel like that's a lot of what we're operating in, and that people are being affected by, whether they know it or not. There aren't many. There are some, but there aren't many subject matter experts on TikTok, for instance.
They don't want to be on I mean, and with the Dunning-Kruger effect, isn't it also the case where the people who genuinely have that knowledge, they really do know, they tend to rate themselves lower in knowledge? Like they have more self-doubt because like you said, it's like the more you know, you start realizing you actually don't know anything. They question themselves. They don't have the same confidence level as someone maybe with less knowledge does.
With less information. And okay. And so I think it's an important point to make. This podcast is not out to get anyone. We want to be very clear about this. We're not out to dog people. We're not out to take anybody down or cancel anybody. That's not the goal of this. Essentially, we're here to explore what is. And I think you and I both have this feeling, and that we see this happen, that even though we all have bias, there are some people who are more aware of that than others, and who kind of push their bias, whether they're conscious of it or not. And so then bias gets put onto topics and ideas and trends, and then information starts to snowball. So we're more going to explore ideas. We're definitely not going to go after people. That is not the goal of this. We're here to have fun with this and explore and to say like, hey, yeah, this is irritating as hell to see it, but people do have strong beliefs, and whether they're conscious of it or not isn't our business necessarily. We just want to see like, okay, what does the research show? Like, what proof do we have of what's happening? And then maybe, I know this is the case for me, like, and I'm sure you have some examples of this too, our own crazy stories of being influenced, because I for sure am highly, highly influenceable.
I still can't believe that, but you have some really good stories, by the way. I mean, you should write a book about your stories. They're wild.
We're going to have a podcast. We're going to have like
Yeah.
Every weird topic that I've tried, we'll have it. So Hannah, do you want to talk about the format of the episodes a little bit?
Yeah, let's talk about it. So every single episode, we are going to answer 4 questions. The first one is going to be the history. What is the history of this thing? Because every trend has some kind of history behind it, whether it be breatharian that we're going to talk about today, carnivore, low carb, high carb, vegan, all these things.
I just learned about slow carb.
Slow carb.
Yeah.
Even more.
Well,
Okay.
I don't actually. I just heard the term. I was like, oh my
So
god,
maybe
another
slow
one. Okay.
carb. So there's a history. It's usually really entertaining. And that's the part that I'm super excited to bring because I love history of food, history of nutrition science. It's very interesting. So that'll be the first question. The second is going to be, what is our bias? Like actually mine and yours. We are going to lay that out on the table and be fully transparent because you, the listener, deserve to know that. You deserve to know if I have a negative bias or a bias against whatever we're discussing, or if I feel I'm biased towards it and I'm leaning towards it. We should put that out there. I mean, every influencer should be telling you that information, but they're not going to because marketing, sales, money.
Doesn't sell many books.
Yes.
and kind of what we were saying before, it's like, I think some people this is part of, I think, of laying out the bias is being charitable. Mm-hmm. I think some people are just so enamored with their idea or with a trend or with what they see that they can't get out of their own way. Mm-hmm. Like, there is a saying, I'm trying to remember it, where it's like, I have to look it up. I'll find it. Keep going.
Okay. So after we talk about our bias, we're just going to dig into what the proof is. So we are going to look, of course, at the researcher. We're researchers. We'll find whatever researchers out there. But in addition to that, we don't want to be limited completely by the science because some things aren't studied because nobody wants to fund it. So we're also going to look at personal experience, clinical anecdotes, basically any kind of proof that exists, even traditional proof. So a lot of things, herbs are a really good example, have, thousands of years of proof, like passed down through tradition. It may be written down or passed down orally, but that is proof, even though it might not be in the PubMed central database. Yeah. And sometimes it is, which is also cool. And then number 4, we'll talk about if it's actually worthwhile. We want you to leave each, podcast after listening with something useful for you. Like maybe you're interested in this trend or whatever it is, and you want to know, should I actually do this? And even if we have a bias, we will be as neutral about, just presenting what is in front of us to help you.
I promise to at least be authentic about my bias. Yes. I don't know if I can be neutral. I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay, I found this quote. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool.
The first principle. Wait, what are we talking about again?
With when we, say this is kind of my take, is that some people just become so enamored with an idea. Like, for instance, when I learned that butter and meat and these animal foods were really healing for us, I was coming out of being a vegan. I felt that experience in my body. Mm-hmm. I was so enthralled with it. I was just I was enamored. I mean, I'm mesmerized. I was like a butter preacher.
I remember that you had the shirt with butter on.
Oh my God. Yeah. I bought a website called butterseriously.com. I owned it for years. Jameson, my best friend, drew an infographic of butter, and the saying was, butter does a body better. Mm-hmm. I would have done anything for butter. So I was just so enamored with it, right? I mean, now it's I look at it in a more balanced way, right? But it's I was so easily fooled just by my own love of that idea and the experience I had in my own body. And so I think that's what I mean that this quote applies to. It's I'm sure there are people who are consciously misleading, But I think most people just get on a trend or they get stuck on a product or something, and then it's not intentional. They just kind of keep going with it. But we are the easiest person to fool. That's the quote. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool. So we're trying to push back against that in ourselves at least a little bit, but to be transparent, and say like, okay, this is kind of where we stand, so that the viewpoint we're coming from.
Yes. And that's the 4 questions.
Every topic will go through those 4 questions. Ooh, I'm nervous to talk about breatharianism. Okay. Okay, first we should tell people where they can find us.
Yes.
So if you want to get in touch with us, you can email us. We have an email address, influencedtodeath@gmail.com. Please send us topics that you'd like to see us cover. If you have a question about a trend, a topic, a product, an idea, something that you see happening in the world of wellness, let us know. You can also find us on Instagram at Influence to Death, and then we're on Substack at Influence to Death.
All weird things
Hannah.
welcome. Weird suggestions. We have passed no judgment. Anything you can suggest.
We're going to get super weird with it.
Breatharianism. Let's talk about it. So
let's do it.
I feel like a lot of people don't know what breatharianism is. I came across it several years ago, and I just thought it was complete BS, because it is the idea that humans do not need food or water. They can exist and thrive solely on air and light, and that's all that they need. And we were not designed for food. We were just designed to breathe air.
I just had a horrible thought, which is, what if we like bring breatharianism back and like unintentionally from this episode?
No, because
I guess it's never fully gone away, but
it's still there. Okay, so
okay.
This sounds like no one would do that, but actually it is in fact very much alive. There are influencers out there who they influence breatharianism, and they host retreats. Usually they cost a lot of money, upwards to the thousands of dollars, basically to go to this place with a dude for a week. You don't get to eat, but you're paying him a lot of money to help you not eat food. I know how it sounds like saying it out loud, but there has been a cult following around it. So let's talk about question 1, the history of breatharianism in the U.S. The man who's considered the founder of or father of Breatharianism.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot it up every time. I'm like, how am I? I'm pretty sure I've been saying it wrong for a while. He's a founder of the Breatharian Institute of America, and his name is Wiley Brooks. He passed away, I believe, in 2016, but he is a person who like created this cult-like following behind breatharianism, even though the practice of not eating or very long fasting is found in different societies around the world and cultures, and has a big, historical significance. But he's the one who like made it popular, basically. So he started this in the 80s, and he really had a cult-like following in Hollywood. Michelle Pfeiffer was a breatharian when she had just moved to Hollywood to start her career. And she says that her friends had to convince her to leave it because it was like draining her bank account, because she was paying all this money to be there, but not eat anything.
In my mind, when you said that, I was like, oh, starving artist. Like, that's not the case, though. Right. This is a different thing. Okay. So yeah, he like made it popular.
He did. And he kind of came on the scene in 1981. He was interviewed on a late night show called The Tomorrow Show. And I'm actually going to play a clip from that, because this is like what people saw and they were like, oh, I want to do that too. And he is charismatic. He's smooth. His voice is so calming. I mean, I can totally, he sounds so confident. Like this guy basically is explaining the science behind breatharianism and how it works and why you should do it. Although I kind of feel like he's making the science up, but to be honest, I don't know enough to know. Like,
Okay.
and I'm sure other people do too. Like, I'm like, maybe could this be real? I don't know. We'll talk about that when we talk about the evidence, but let me pull this up.
Now here's Mr. Wiley Brooks, who stopped eating 17 years ago, claiming that all the elements we need to survive are in the air and an occasional glass of fruit juice. This is called Breatharianism. And if it sounds hard to swallow, we're going to find out now from the man who knows. Please welcome Mr. Wiley Brooks. Here he is. Wiley, welcome to our show. Let me ask you haven't eaten for 17 years. You have not had a sandwich, a hamburger, hot dog, pretzel, a piece of roast beef, fish, vegetables, nothing for 17 years.
Right. Well, let me explain what breatharianism is first,
Okay.
if I might. Breatharianism.
But you haven't eaten for 17 years,
right,
we know it.
Right. I don't eat, yes. Breatharianism is a philosophy that believes that the human body, when it's in perfect harmony with itself and nature, is a perfect breatharian. Now, all of the constituents that we need is taken from the air we breathe. And the fact is, there is only one thing that keeps the human body alive, and that is breathing. The food that we take is the same as any other thing we take into the body, as it becomes a habit. In other words, eating is an acquired habit, just like drinking alcohol or smoking cigarettes.
Mm-hmm. Well, does that mean that when a baby is born, you don't have to give it anything to eat, no milk or anything?
No, that would only work if the mother was a breatharian. Because we don't come into the world as breatharians from mothers that are breatharian, before we even get started, our blood is poisoned. You see, we already start at a disadvantage when we're born. So because of that, a person needs to be an adult, and that's why I don't even lecture people who are young about being a breatharian. First, you must kick the habit of eating. You see, we've done...
Wow.
Okay, so he says you must kick the habit of eating, and that's something that I've seen studying this in these retreats where people are, the whole purpose of them and why they are paying the money to be there is to help them get out of the habit of eating.
Yeah.
And so removing desire for food, basically, which I think is a
And
lot.
how he like connects it to like your blood is poison.
Yeah.
With food. It's like this. I feel like I've seen this in a lot of what, we're going to cover on this podcast, where there's this like dirty, poisonous, toxic element that you have to like cleanse yourself of or give up. This like, there's like a word I keep trying to think of, this like sparse, like clean vibe.
That is a common theme in some. Yeah. And I have a lot of feelings about that. Not a fan. Not a fan.
We're going to tell you about our bias here in just a second. It's interesting though, like as we've been talking about this, it's like how he came to this, like if he was sick as a kid, like he didn't like to eat, so he was kind of just naturally like
averse to
drawn. Yeah.
And there's not a whole lot you can find about his childhood and history. But in another interview, he talks about how he really got into fasting after an injury in his 30s. And he had heard that fasting can help your body heal, which this is back in the 70s. I mean, that is true, actually. Like now, like 10 years ago, I can't remember the name of the scientist that discovered autophagy and fasting.
Autophagy. Yeah.
Another word I always say incorrectly. I like say it in my head and I read it and then I never say it out loud.
I do that with extrapolate and have done it in front of students multiple times. So don't worry.
So yeah, he decided to experiment. He started fasting. He started feeling better. And then he was like, I don't really like to eat food. And this is like making me feel better. So maybe I could just keep doing this. And then according to him, by the time it was 1981, he hadn't eaten in 17 years. Now, I don't know how true that is. I mean, we don't know. It's his own account. There are, there's a little bit of drama with Wiley because,
right.
Yeah. In the late 80s, he had some followers and a ex-girlfriend who came out and accused him of eating, basically. They were like, this guy is full of crap. He does eat. What he does is he waits till everybody's asleep at the retreat or in the house, and then he goes down to the 7-Eleven, he buys a bunch of junk food and eats it. And his girlfriend said his favorite thing to eat was KFC. And I think
I
there was
love it.
even maybe a paparazzi who snapped a photo of him leaving a convenience store in the middle of the night. And then he lost a lot of his followers because
Mhm.
they all truly believed in breatharianism. It wasn't that they didn't believe in the movement. They were like, this guy's lying. Like, we know it can be
Right.
done, and he's just not doing it right. And he's leading
This thing that this guy sold us on that he's not doing.
it.
We know it can happen.
Yes. And so he, of course, was like, well, my ex-girlfriend, she's just mad because I broke up with her and I don't eat, except for occasionally having some juice or food because I like the way it tastes. And that was in the 80s. Fast forward to 2014, he had another interview with Vice News. And in that interview, he was it was getting really weird. And he identified as Christ, or the energy of Christ, that he had been multiple different reincarnated, throughout his life and was all of these different healing people like Buddha and Christ and Muhammad, like all of this. He also said that he was actually living in the fifth dimension and he had ascended there, that he was a being from another planet. And his goal still had this, benevolent goal of like trying just to help people. He just wanted to help people move on to the next dimension and be their best selves as breatharians and clean their blood. And also, by this point, he said that the only clean food that wasn't radioactive that you could eat, I realize how this is sounding as I'm saying.
It's amazing. Please keep going.
But this is really what he said, is that was a quarter pounder with cheese and a Diet Coke specifically. Only thing from the menu, I guess at McDonald's, right, that you could order. And that's what he ate. So I think he did admit by that point he was eating that occasionally. And something else he said is that you could only be a breatharian if you had the right environment. So if someone was struggling with it or felt like they had to eat food, it was probably because the air was dirty. They didn't have access to good sunlight, all these things, which I guess that makes sense. Like, yeah, but and some other breatharian influencers have said that as well. Now, Wiley was never medically supervised. No one ever like went to his house and was like, I'm going to see if you're really not eating. But there's another woman who is still active to this day, hosting retreats. Jazz Maheen was her chosen name. Her given name was Ellen Grieve. And she actually kind of did the same thing as Wiley, has big following. And then she was interviewed on 60 Minutes a while ago. And a medical examiner came to her home to monitor her and see if she really actually was not eating. And the experiment did not go well. Basically, they had to end it because she was slurring her speech. She was, fainting. Like she was in the early stages of starvation and dehydration. Because let's remember, it's not just not eating, it's not drinking water.
I love what you wrote in the show notes. You just wrote, not doing so hot. Not doing too good. Okay. And I'm laughing, but it's kind of a dick move to laugh because people have died from this.
Yeah. And something that made news headlines a while ago was a woman who died, and in her possession was a book by this woman, Jazz Maheen. And they believe she was trying to follow the breatharian lifestyle, and she starved, or maybe succumbed to dehydration first. I don't know, but it's really sad because, and this is why I'm so excited about this podcast, because it's stuff like this. Like this is I feel like a far end of the spectrum where this could actually physically harm you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other things, or maybe it's just waste your time and your money, or it's just, not
a good fit.
Right. And this is really serious. So, however, Jazz Maheen claimed, like Wiley, well, I'm not doing good because the air in the city is too dirty, and similar to Wiley, lots of secondhand accounts of her having a fridge stocked with food, people being like, no, I know that lady, she eats all the time. This is not true. And so it becomes this he said, she said thing where I'm like, I really don't know. But she is still hosting retreats. People still pay buckets of money to go learn from this guru.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's another guy, Ray Mayor, and
That's who I've heard of.
he's a
I
kind of
think
a big,
most recently.
his,
Hottie, big, super hottie. He might not be doing too hot, but he's also super hot.
right.
Very attractive man.
And people love him. If you go to his website and watch the video testimonials, they just adore him. And it's the same thing. You pay, you know, a few $1,000. You go to this little villa, no food. You learn how to not eat food, not have the desire for food. And they also don't drink water for the 9 days. I still don't understand how that can be.
I don't know.
Because
I have no idea.
yeah.
Are they doing okay? This is a really weird question, but here we are. Do they do enemas?
Some do. I think that's kind of like your choice. So there was an interview in GQ where, well, not an interview, a story in GQ several years ago where a journalist actually he got access to a retreat. And there were some people doing enemas. I think it was just like their idea of how they would more further cleanse their body of all the toxins and blood impurities. And I think that retreat was either 4 or 7 days. And on that outsider perspective, the people were not doing great, you know, not eating, even though they reported they were doing great. But that the journalist view was like, don't seem like they're thriving.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking like enemas are a way to get water quickly. I mean, like the most famous, you know, way of using enema is like college kids will soak tampons in alcohol and then this is so far. I mean, I guess it's applicable in this way. You soak it, whatever, in vodka and then shove it up your butt and you get drunk really quick. It's also incredibly hydrating as somebody who's done a lot of just clean water enemas in her life.
So maybe they were getting water from doing enemas, potentially.
Yeah. Also, don't soak a tampon in alcohol and shove it up your butt. That was a big thing when I was in college, 10,000 years ago. But yeah, I just wonder if that's a way that maybe they were getting water. But right, as you're saying, you know, people have reported like they're not doing very well.
Yeah. And so there's not really, you know, and at the end of these retreats, they break the, you know, they start to drink water again. They have these like ceremonies with water or juice. And, you know, I have to say that I do wonder if I have to wonder about eating disorders and disordered eating.
Yeah.
When I see stuff like this and any type of strict diet, I mean, for me, even as when I worked with clients, like if someone had a history of disordered eating, I was never telling them to count calories or any, you know, like, because it can really be triggering and like bring back this feeling of control. Like I have to control my food and not everybody does so well with that.
Yeah. And then, you know, the thing I think is like, are these people turning to this as a solution for problems that they haven't gotten solved in conventional medicine? And I think that's a common theme also of a lot of the topics that we'll cover. It's like people have medical issues or symptoms, or, you know, they just feel completely disenfranchised by the system that, you know, basically popular medicine. And so they go toward these solutions out of desperation. And it's, you know, it's like, that's from a marketing perspective, right? I'm like, oh yeah, that's like the problem that you can use your marketing to solve. So that, I think for me, and I know for you too, like how you started, that's the part that makes me angry is like, we've got broken systems everywhere. I think you and I got into this work because we wanted a really valid way to address issues that maybe weren't as focused on in conventional medicine. And then we got into this functional world and we were like, oh my God, you know, it's just as batshit crazy. It's in ways it's even crazier on this side because of the lack of regulation, which in some ways is a pro, but in some ways is a con. So yeah, I mean, I think it was Ray Mayor, or were you telling me also there were people in Ecuador that specifically do? Yeah, because I have friends that lived in Vilcabamba, and there were people doing breatharian retreats, and they called me to be like, hey, do you think this is legitimate? Like, hey, lady who's like gone through, at that point, I think, I was like a semester or something into graduate school. And I was like, based on my background, I want to say sure, which we'll talk about a little bit. I had a 2-day stint of trying to be a breatharian myself in my 20s. But based on what we know, there's just no way that this is possible. But many, many people were coming to those retreats in Ecuador.
So that's how I feel, is that initially, with my knowledge of how the metabolism works, why we need food for energy, and my experience of working with clients who don't eat enough food, who are undereat,
right,
and myself with a personal history of having, reactive hypoglycemia and like having to be mindful, the thought that someone could go without food and water specifically for years, I'm like, that's impossible. Like that goes against everything.
It goes against everything.
It makes no sense, but we can talk about our bias now, I guess.
Wait, can we talk about this one woman you have on here that doesn't eat, but there are a lot of photos on her social media feed of iced latte?
Yeah. So,
because I want to be her. If I get to pick a breatharian avatar, I'm picking iced latte avatar.
Yeah. So there's this woman, when I'm like, who is still, because, Wiley has passed on. And so I was like, who's doing this now? Well, someone has taken over the Breatharian Institute, although I don't think it's technically functioning. And so I'm trying to find these people on Instagram. I'm like, surely there's breatharians on here. And there's this one woman who sells breath retreats. She does like all that thing, breatharianism or breathing medicine. I don't know. Like there's all these different buzzy words for it.
Yeah.
And apparently she doesn't eat. She's made videos talking about how she doesn't eat. And I'm when I say that, I mean, like, it's going beyond fasting, right? Like we know that fasting can have health benefits, and we'll talk about that in a different episode, because I don't believe fasting's for everybody. It depends, but it can be very healing. It actually can. This is not that. This is like a different type of not eating. But like you said, on her Instagram feed, there's all these pictures of iced lattes, of her at the beach with iced lattes. And I'm like, what?
She doesn't eat, Hannah, but she drinks the most delicious drink there is, which is an iced latte.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my bias is pretty obvious.
Okay, so let's talk about our bias. You go first.
I mean, this is so hard for me. It's like, the reason I said I feel shame and fear is because I'm like, oh my God, these like metabolic experts that I have the extreme pleasure and benefit of working with in sports nutrition. I mean, that is their wheelhouse. It's like they know metabolism better than anything else, because that's how you get an athlete to win, is you optimize their performance, and nutritionally you optimize their metabolism. Yeah. That's like why keto doesn't work for endurance or high intensity sport, which I think we're going to have a whole episode on that. It's like these people are the best of the best in the world right now. I can just imagine presenting this topic to that group and being like, hey, what do you guys think? Okay. So I can like feel that inside of me. But then there's the other weirdo part of me that like, I mean, I'm sure this will come out as we continue talking over episodes, but like dropped out of school and was a tree sitter in Eugene, Oregon, and hitchhiked around Hawaii and tried to be a breatharian myself, like for real, found survival into the 21st century. This book by Viktoras Kulvinskis, he was like a very famous raw foodist and breatharian. In my early 20s, flew to Kauai, decided to hike into the Kalalau Valley, one of the hardest hikes, I mean, definitely on Hawaii, but that I've ever hiked. And the only thing I brought was a little baggie of pumpkin seeds, because I had read this book and I loved it and I wanted to be a breatharian. Obviously, no. I remember talking to a dear friend. I'm still friends with this woman, and she was like, "Well, have you met a breatharian?" And I was like, "No." And she was like, "Do you know why? It's because if you don't eat, you die." So
That's good self
I have
advice.
these, yeah, she's very pragmatic. So I kind of have these two different sides of me. It's like the part of me that still is like so curious sometimes. What's that saying? It's like, don't be so open minded that your brain falls out. I like can go in that direction, which is, it's like why I'm so influenceable. But then the other part of me that has just been steeped in metabolic science, and it's like, this just is not how it works.
Mhm.
Like we eat food and we take those nutrients and those calories. That's how our chemistry set works
Mhm.
in our body. But I'm also going to put this out there. I think this is interesting, which I know we're going to talk about in the next question. It's like, there is not just a history of this, but there's like an ancient tradition of breatharianism in a lot of different cultures. So I think there's just all these facets. But at the end of the day, I'm like, this can't happen. This just cannot happen. There's no way. So that's my bias.
I feel very similar. Like I'm open. As stupid as that sounds. I'm like, I don't really have a bias. Like I know what I have has been ingrained in me as far as biochemistry and how the metabolism works and all these things. And so every ounce of common sense, I'm just like, this just isn't even possible.
Yeah.
But I'm open to learning. Like I understand that science is constantly changing. Not
Yeah.
that I think that it's going to change to say that, by the way, nobody actually has to eat any food. We were wrong. But I think it's interesting to like open your mind to like new approaches and ideas of thinking about things.
Yeah.
And something that I think is interesting when we talk about the evidence in just a second is that, and the history is that maybe like historically, I mean, I don't think it was called breatharianism. Like, I honestly don't know. I don't know if Wiley made that term up. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But
Where
in
that term
other
came from.
cultures and traditions, like it wasn't always just not eating or drinking, but it might be very minimalized. Like you're only having, this a very small amount of food, or it's kind of more just about, I guess it gets more into just like fasting, pure fasting, to approach it.
Yeah.
So
Or
it is
like
different.
there's like a ideal maybe that we shoot for
Right.
versus, and we've talked about that a little bit, where it's like maybe it's not the actuality of not eating. It's just this sort of like spiritual ideal that maybe people like, we have, evidence. It's called bigu in the Taoist tradition. Inedia was another term for it, which is Latin for fasting. Nirjal, Upvasa in the Ayurvedic tradition. So like these are, you know, recorded traditions of not eating or drinking, like basically breatharianism, like living off prana, living off
Right.
the. So it's like maybe it's like a spiritual ideal, and these people kind of knew this wasn't an actuality, but was like a way to get closer to God or to live like a more like pared down lifestyle versus we're taking it literally. And I think the part that for me, and I think for you too, that is like the influence to death part is that people take that literally and then they charge people money saying it's going to help you accomplish X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And we have no evidence of that. What we do have evidence of is that you can starve to death.
Right.
We're for sure about that.
That is
So,
exactly what it is that it's this pure idea, and then someone takes advantage of it and turns it into something that is
mhm.
steeped with all of these problems. And because no
Yeah.
one's going to pay $2,000 to go on a retreat where you could eat, if you want to, because you can. And if the breatharian guru told you the truth and was like, well, you can, it's more about, you know, the thought that you could do this, like in a perfect world, like maybe we could do this. Like, no, you have to sell an extreme. Like people want
Yeah.
this strict regimen. That's what they're paying for. I mean, a lot of people love that. They want.
And we see that everywhere.
Mhm.
Like you only eat meat. You don't eat any animal foods. You don't eat any carbohydrates. You don't eat any lectins. It's like you see it come up over and over. This just happens to be one that is so extreme, it will actually kill you.
Right.
Like this can kill you.
Right.
You have to eat food and drink water. But there is that part of my brain that's like, what was happening in those traditions? Like, why was this there? And yeah, so maybe it was just this like way to get closer to God, not actually. I mean, you're going to get super close to God. You stop eating.
Well, that's the other thing is that, a lot of people report, like in the Ray Mayor testimonial videos, people talk about, I feel like this form of enlightenment. I feel, almost dizzy with peace. And it's like, that's because you're not eating. I mean, not to discredit the spiritual part of it, but it's like also when you stop eating, and this happens when people start the ketogenic diet, go into full ketosis, you start feeling differently. And that's different because you're actually eating fat and, protein and low carb. But like when you're not eating at all, like with fasting, it's the same thing. You go into ketosis. It's from fasting. It's and you have endorphins that are released and all of adrenaline, like all of these things that make you feel this kind of high feeling. And it's a physiological thing, not necessarily a spiritual thing, but it can be too. I don't know.
Yeah. I think, one thing that we see, this pattern that will come up over and over is like, there's like a grain of truth, or there's a grain of like something that is real in almost every trend, or kind of influenceable idea. And then that is taken and packaged up into a farce, really. I mean, I would say it's like, or it's taken and packaged up into something that is really like sellable. And what it seems like is more and more people want a nuanced view versus just like do this or do that, but it's still in the minority. Like you're saying, most people just want to be told, eat this, don't eat that, and it's like the reality is there's so much more nuance and subtlety, which is why when, you speak to a client or you students or whatever, you have to say like, it depends. It's like, of course it depends. There's 10,000 different inputs that could be happening. But when that grain of truth gets put into like a packageable product, that goes away.
Yep.
It feels good. We feel like we're really in control, but
it's not that easy, unfortunately.
It's not that easy. Yeah. And especially with this, it's not that easy. So
let's look at the evidence.
Yeah. Okay. This is interesting.
Like, is there evidence that this could be at all possible to do? So the best thing I could find is this paper called Claims of help me.
We don't have to cut that out. That's one of my favorite songs. I think it's anomalously Claims of anomalously long fasting.
An assessment of the evidence from investigated cases. I don't know how legit it's a review paper, and I don't know the author. He's not affiliated with the university. But it does pull together all of these cases throughout history where they basically observed people who claimed, like Wiley, that they haven't eaten in 17 years or whatever. And there were, out of 38 cases, only 10 were confirmed as fraud. Like they absolutely knew this person is lying. They're hiding food under their bed at night and going in there and eating it. And
I just imagine like a bucket of KFC.
Yes.
Not Sprouts, not a smoothie, straight up delicious Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yum.
Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
So in these accounts, people reported a range of like no food or water from as short as 4 days to over a year. Absolutely, promising they had not eaten that long. And there were a couple that were determined to be just an anomaly, like they had no explanation for how this is happening. One of those is a record from 1943. It was a woman who actually was observed while she was in either a hospital or some kind of treatment facility. I don't know why she was there, but she took no food or water except for daily communion. So maybe she was having some like flatbread, or I don't know if she was having wine with that. Like what but that was for
Yeah.
38 days. And in this one, they were observed, like they knew she had nothing in her room, no water, no food. And for
Right. She was in a
38
medical
days,
setting.
she survived and she was fine. But there's not a whole bunch of details around that. It was from 1943, and we don't really know like who was monitored. Like it could be
Yeah.
not true, basically.
Yeah.
We don't know. But at the time, the people, watching her were obviously super skeptical as well, probably. And we're like, surely she's eating, surely she'll start withering away. And she was fine. Another interesting thing from a lot of the observed cases is that people didn't have a lot of weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was some weight loss, but not as drastic as you would think, from
Right.
not eating anything. So in this paper,
Yeah.
this guy basically, so if anybody goes to read this, we'll link it. He quotes a few papers. So to make his case, basically, kind of doing the same thing we're doing. Like, is this possible? Is there any scientific basis where someone could actually not eat or drink, like, and survive?
Right.
And so he talks about a 2017 article in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and he pulls a direct quote from it, saying that surprisingly, there's very little biological evidence of causality between energy expenditure and the food that you need to take in, let alone evidence of underlying molecular mechanisms. And so when I read this, I was like, what?
Yeah.
Are you basically
Yeah.
saying we actually don't know if we need to eat food? Like, we don't know what's actually
That's what it sounds like. The way he used it, that is how he made it sound, for sure.
Yes. But when we read this paper that he was referencing, which is just like I think a review, an editorial,
Yeah.
it was taken out of context.
Yeah. And we tried to find this guy that wrote the review paper, the original review paper. We can't find him. Well, he's in Berlin.
Yeah.
Supposedly. But, we tried to find, like, he has a Gmail address instead of, it's not that you have to have affiliation with university, but like.
Usually you do when you write a peer review, like something that's published in like a respected journal or database.
Usually you see people associated with some type of institution, and he just has a Gmail address. And then I'm trying to think if there were any other details that I could pull up. It just like had his address in Berlin, but
so we don't know who this guy is. He did pull together some interesting things, and basically just kind of keeping an open mind, like how could this be possible? Could it be this? Could it be this? He talks about how, melanin in our skin, the pigment in our skin, may be involved in transforming energy from light into ATP, like metabolic energy that you use, and might cover up to 90% of cells' energy requirements. But this is this is really theoretical, right? Like there's some evidence out there showing that investigating in animals and things that aren't plants, showing that maybe we could make some energy from sunlight. And there are the people that stare at the sun. Like that's going to be another podcast who kind of claim the same thing. It's like you can get the energy that you need from the sun. And that's, I don't know. Sounds cool. But we don't know if that's even.
Yeah. Possible. In the literature, it's hard to find any. Just any type of metabolic. Kind of
metabolism
why
is
that
really
would happen.
Complex. Yeah. And I will say, like, even though we have this, it's like we should have this clear understanding of how it works. But I always want to know, like, how do we know this? How do we know how each step, how do they work? How does this work? How do we even know? Like, there's so many things in science like that where it's like this law, and my mind always goes to, how do you know that? And once you get to a certain point, it's not like you can just Google this and figure it out. Like you have to dig through research papers, and they're hard to read. When you get into those like molecular mechanisms, I'm not really smart enough to understand that. I try.
It's deep. It's
really
deep biochemistry to understand this. So I think it's one of those things where it's like, gosh, I think we're turned very similarly. It's like, could there be some way that this could happen? We don't have much evidence of it, but it's like also to put 100% of your full faith and weight on what we know so far also seems like folly.
Yeah.
And so when you're just like in this in between place, it's like, okay, well, we are logical enough to, I think our takeaway to you is going to say, like, okay, you need to eat food and drink water. That's the takeaway. But it's like, there's this like subtlety in between where it's like, okay, well, where is the line? To me, the line is like, you don't hurt or take advantage of people. You can think about this, you can ponder it, you can be on the lookout for cool biochemical studies that show, like more detail of how metabolism works and like that, or if we're learning anything new. But like when I read this paper, I was like, ah, man, he kind of took these quotes out of context. Like this paper, at least, was not super interesting to me just because of how he used quotes from, from other papers just to like prove his point.
Right. Which you did not do.
Yeah, you shouldn't. That's not good science writing. But I'm with you. It's like, I'm curious. Do we have this 100% fully figured out? And do we have it enough figured out where we can say like, this is probably how it goes and it's probably not going to change? I think, in my opinion, probably. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't know enough to know if that's the case or not. So
yeah,
the thing that's interesting to me is like, okay, there's not a lot about this in the scientific literature. What we do know is just metabolism is fairly understood, and we eat food and then we make ATP out of that food after like multiple steps of breaking down the constituents that are in our food. But then there are these traditions that have, breatharianism style fasting as part of their culture. What was going on there? So that question is still open for me.
It is. And I think something that's interesting for me to think about is like the environment in which the person is in. So like how Wiley and Jasmine both would just say, well, it's not working because my environment isn't right and I can't do it. And then I'm thinking about how like traditionally there is a very spiritual like part of it, and how a lot of people who do this are maybe nuns or monks or some other spiritual person. And their setting that they're in is not mine. Like they're not going to work. They're not stuck in rush hour traffic. They don't have to make dinner for everybody. Like, so not eating and drinking in their environment is going to be different than a modern a busy person, like in this crazy hectic lifestyle. For the same reason, I don't recommend fasting to people who are under a lot of stress or like have a really busy, it works differently. Your nervous system is in a different state. And then that changes how you're responding.
Totally. God, I mean, I think about, okay, this is the weird connection. Like, so we are currently in the middle of Boston, my husband and I, in this apartment, and a very hardcore raw food, juicing, wheatgrass, breatharianism institute. I didn't realize this at the time, but from that book, Survival into the 21st Century, their Hippocrates Health Institute was right down the street on Exeter Street in Back Bay in Boston. It's not quiet and pristine here, even at the time that they were down there. But that was a huge, weird connection to me when I started looking through. I still have a copy of that book 22 years later, the one that inspired me to be a short-term breatharian. And I took a picture of the building that their institute was in. I walked down there the other day and got a little video.
It's so cool.
It's still there. Yeah. So Victor and his crew were down there trying to be, they were definitely raw foodists, but maybe some of them were trying to be breatharians. Boston is not conducive to the environment you just described.
Yeah.
There are a lot of cars out there. A lot of smoke. Oh my goodness.
Any other evidence that we want to discuss?
There's that one paper. It's also a review on what's called Bigu state and Taoism. The title is Can Meditation Trigger Alternate Metabolic Pathways Through Epigenetic Changes? So epigenetic, basically just like our environment's influence on how our genes do what they need to do. Basically, can meditation change the way that metabolism works? There's not great evidence, again, backing up many points in this paper, but it still triggers that part of my brain that's like, what if? Like flying in the face of everything that I know, could there be something here? I think it's interesting to figure out, but, and I don't want to move us to the takeaway too soon, so stop me if I am. At the end of the day, I'm like, you have to eat food, and you for sure have to drink water. And it's hard from the context of this podcast's, kind of what we're talking about here, because I think people are taking this idea and they're taking advantage of people. That's what it looks like to me. When you have a retreat and, I don't know what the promises are, but the marketing is pretty slick, and it looks, I mean, even to me still, I know so much more than I did, but I'm like, wow, it's like tropical and warm, and it's going to heal all these things. And, like my skin's going to clear up and my fatigue will go away, whatever, all the, like points that they're saying. And it's like, okay, but the main thing is that you don't eat or drink. It just flies in the face of even, God, okay, here's a point. And I know that you know this really well. When we talk about detoxification, technically it's called biotransformation in the medical terminology. Fasting is the opposite of detoxification. There are wonderful changes that happen in our immune systems, and our mitochondria from fasting. But if we're talking about like poison blood and detox and like that, detoxification is a nutrient dependent state. It depends. We unless again biochemistry changes and something new gets discovered, we know for sure, just like with metabolism that needs nutrients to create ATP. If we want to detoxify from whatever type of exposure, we have to have nutrients for that.
Yeah.
Especially protein.
Yes.
Like the most vile, people hate protein the most, like no meat, like I guess they're eating soy protein or whatever. But like, so yeah, in the context of all of this, I'm just like, we run on these compounds. Could there be some switch in, and I do believe that this is the case, that there is probably some spiritual connection to us as creatures. Actually, I'm totally agnostic. I don't even know if that's true or not. It seems like there might be. If that's the case, maybe some switch gets flipped through meditation, and then we can, not live on nutrients, but not there.
Yeah.
I'm like filming a podcast in the middle of Boston.
Yeah. It comes back to me when we're like, if we want to move on to the fourth question, like, is it worthwhile? Is that like, no. I mean, no, it's a bad idea. And
we'll see you next episode.
Over.
That's it.
Mic drop. But I mean, like you said, I feel like these people are taking advantage of people who are at their wits' end, like they need a solution and they don't know where else to turn. And they're like, maybe this will work. This person says it will change my life. And I mean, that's the same with so many other trends. Is like, there's always this one, the person making the money off of it,
by and large,
is going to tell you whatever they have to convince you it's going to be the best for you. And I hate that. Like, I wish there was a miracle cure like this.
Yeah.
I really do. Like, I wish that I didn't have to cook dinner anymore and that I would have, live forever and ascend to the fifth dimension by just like not
Hannah, if you had been a breatharian when you had your son, then he wouldn't have to eat.
And it would save a lot of money for me. It would be great. But like, it's just not that easy. And so yes, you should eat food and drink water. And there are other modalities for healing.
Yeah, really balanced.
Really do
awesome
work.
Yeah, just like a balanced diet. I mean, this is also an aspect that we haven't covered, but it's totally true. We have also a lot of evidence on the effect of muscle wasting in people and how it's like one of the strongest determinants of death is muscle strength and muscle mass. I mean, I don't know. Again, it's like it butts right up against this like unexplained miracle type of experience that somebody might have as a breatharian, but in the physical plane, this just doesn't hold water.
Right. Physical plane.
So, yeah. Anyway, okay. Well, so in contrast to this, in our next episode, we are going to talk about the carnivore diet.
Yes.
Basically, the exact opposite of breatharianism. So, we're going to explore that idea, but we'd love to hear your thoughts. So, leave a comment on Substack or send us an email. Again, if you have any ideas or questions about wellness trends that you want to see us cover, let us know. But we have a list. I mean, there is no lack of trends that we already have on a list of show
Do
ideas.
we want to mention any that we're going to be covering coming up?
Yeah. Oh, please. Yeah. Should we just like go down the list a little bit and give people a quick preview of
so
the rest of the crazy shit that we're going to talk about?
To entice you to continue to to come back for more.
Yeah. Tune in.
I don't actually have the list pulled up. Do you?
Oh, here. I can do it. I got you. So we're going to talk about carnivore. We're going to talk about continuous glucose monitors for people who don't have metabolic dysfunction. So people who don't have diabetes. We're going to talk about the stare at the sun people. We don't even know the technical name of that yet, but there are a whole group of people who believe that you can stare at the sun to get your energy. We should have just done a double header with this and breatharianism.
It's similar.
We're going to talk about hyrudotherapy. You would know this as leech therapy, but it's a real therapy. We're going to talk about the ideas of the Weston Price Foundation, Ray Peat, lectins and lectin-free diet, Dan Buettner, the Blue Zone diet, and I guess the ideas around not eating meat. Primal diet. I'll have some great stories about that one. Led by Augenis von der Planets, now deceased, but an all raw paleo diet. We're going to talk about probiotics, their legitimacy, autoimmune, paleo protocol, fruitarians, instinctive eaters, are blue blockers legit? Are EMFs actually killing us? I definitely want to do some episodes on the 90s and early 2000s raw food, David Wolf trends that were happening. And we have a guest that will come on and tell us his amazing experience with helping to create some of David Wolf's products. Methylene blue is on the list. Does sugar really hurt us? What about seed oils? Summits. We have a whole episode on summits. Every health summit that you ever signed up for. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about thermography and mammography. Should we still put butter in our coffee? Biohacking. So that whole topic. Cranial sacral therapy. That is just a few of the, we have a big list. So yeah, we're going to cover some trends. We'll get to veganism at some point.
But yeah, my personal fave.
Okay, Hannah, this has been fun. I cannot wait to keep doing this with you.
Same. I'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.